beautifully organized very nicely by the Academy. And I believe Lakshmi Temple from Malaysia, KL, is also participating. I went to the temple many, many years ago with my Guru Maharaj, and we had such a wonderful time there with the programs. To all of you who have been coming through the temple for this program, and to all of you who've come through the Academy, we welcome you very much, and we thank you for joining us. I understand that there are also devotees from quite a few places around the world. We thank you all for joining us today too. This session has been very nicely conceived by Vishnu Chaitanya Prabhu. So my humble obeisances to him, because he's made it very wonderful. We are just a few days away from the most auspicious appearance of the Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Vishnu Chaitanya Prabhu's wonderful plan was to try and take 3 days to try and remember some pastimes of the Lord. I was thinking actually that logically we should normally go from the birth in the sense of someone coming into the world. In the Lord's sense, it is considered an appearance. So we could start with the appearance of the Lord and touch on certain pastimes. But actually, the more I meditated on it, I thought it would be good for us to actually start by remembering the pastimes of the Lord, two very specific pastimes, and then on the auspicious day of Janmasthami, we should all remember his appearance, because that's the day that he actually appeared. Now, before we start, I want to just invoke the auspicious presence of Srila Prabhupada and my spiritual master. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udire. Nashta Prayesha Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So what is very important today is for us to understand why we are doing this. When festivals come, very often it's a time of joy. But the whole point of Janmashtami is not only to remember Krishna, but more importantly, to glorify Krishna. Remembrance of Krishna is premised on his glorification, actually. Srila Prabhupada writes in the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam that even amongst human beings, living entities, we all like it when someone glorifies us, isn't it? We feel very happy, or we feel shy, or embarrassed, but it is glorification. And even if you glorify a little child or a friend, and if it's actually heartfelt, then you'll find that person becomes very happy. So our acharyas tell us that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is known in scriptures as Sarva Karana Karanam. He is the cause of all causes. Therefore, is it not imperative that we should glorify him when we glorify his creation? That is why in Bhagavatam, it is very nicely stated, in the pages of Bhagavatam, 12th canto, 12th chapter, 48th verse. There, Shukadev Goswami, the speaker of Bhagavatam, tells Parikshit Maharaj, Sankirtyamano Bhagavan Anantaha Shrutanubhavo Vyasanam hi pumsam Pravishya Chittam Vidunoti Ashesham Yata Tamo Arko Abram Ivativataha. So this shloka is very important because it sets a context to what we are speaking about today. Shukadev Goswami says, when people properly glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or if they just simply hear about his power, then what happens? The Lord personally enters into their hearts. He personally enters. And what does he do when he enters into our hearts? He cleanses away every trace of misfortune. Such an important point. So what are we doing for the next 3 days? For the next 3 days, all we are doing is we're trying to properly glorify Krishna. And how do we do that? By remembering his great pastimes and his appearance. And just by trying to do that in a proper manner, in a heartfelt manner. If we just try to hear about his power like what we will do now in the next hour, then two things will happen. Bhagavatam tells us affirmatively that Krishna personally will enter into our hearts. So kind. Krishna doesn't send a delegate. He personally comes into our hearts. And when he walks into our heart, like a transcendental vacuum cleaner, He just cleanses away every trace of misfortune that we may have. You may ask, what is considered misfortune in Bhagavatam? Misfortune actually means the inability to understand who we are in relation to the Supreme Lord. That is actually our misfortune. So this is a very important point we should remember. Now, Vishnu Chaitanya Prabhu also conceived a very beautiful point. All these 3 days, right, we have a garland, a common garland. And very often a garland in Bhagavatam means a shloka. A garland in Bhagavad Gita means a shloka. When you have a garland and you have a picture, the garland will span the start and the end of the picture, correct? So there is a verse from Bhagavad Gita that is going to be the garland that we adorn Krishna with for the next 3 days. It is found in the 4th chapter, 8th verse, and it's a very famous verse. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma samstapanartaya sambhavami yuge yuge. And the meaning is very nice. Krishna tells to deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to re-establish the principles of religion. I myself appear millennium after millennium. So this is a very important verse. I think all of us who have grown up in Vedic culture, we have heard this many times. But for these 3 sessions, we will deepen our understanding of this verse. Not a cursory understanding, but a deeper understanding. Krishna tells us in this verse why he comes to this world. That's why Janmasthami is coming. Krishna comes to deliver those who are pious. They are known as sadhunam, sadhus. And our acharyas tell us, a sadhu is one who is fixed in Krishna consciousness. That is definition of sadhu. A sadhu may not know all the rituals that are found in the Karmakand portion of the Vedas, for example, but he understands that the true principle of religion is to always chant and remember Krishna. That is the most important principle. And because he is always a sadhu, Krishna's first duty is always to protect and deliver those who are sadhus. But at the same time, Krishna is very expert. In one action, he can create so many solutions, and he can perform and achieve so many objectives. So Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita also tells us that not only does Krishna deliver the pious, but he also annihilates those who are miscreants, those who cause disturbance and difficulty and anxiety to society. And after doing these two, by doing these two, Krishna then will re-establish the principle of religion. And always we must remember, Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam. In 6.3.19, I think, of Srimad Bhagavatam, Yamaraj tells, the Yamadutas, that all the principles of religion are not established by man, they are established by Krishna. So this is why Krishna comes. But one other secret the Acharyas tell us is that very often when we hear about Krishna and his Leelas, it's always about him annihilating this demon and fighting that demon. So it's not inconceivable and quite natural that sometimes we think Krishna's purpose to come to this world is just to destroy, to annihilate. But our acharyas tell us no, actually that's not the reason. The reason why the Lord especially comes is always to appease his unalloyed and pure devotees. The byproduct of that is to check the atheistic temperaments of this world. So please remember this garland, Prabhus and Matajis, because this is the garland that's going to adorn all 3 days for us to remember Krishna. Another very important component to this garland is another verse from Bhagavatam. In the verse of Bhagavatam, 2nd canto, 4th chapter, 13th verse, 2.4.13, Shukadev Goswami sings his beautiful prayer to Krishna. Bhuyo namatsad vrijane chide asatam asambhavaya akhila sattva murtaye pumsam puna paramahamsyam vyavastitanam anumrigyadashuse. And here Shukadev Goswami says, I offer my respectful obeisances to you, Krishna, again and again. Why? Because you are the liberator of the pious devotees. Same point that 4.8 of Bhagavad Gita says, affirmed in Bhagavatam. So it is stated here, Shukadev Goswami says, Krishna liberates the pious devotees. Liberation doesn't mean they have to die and get liberated. No. In devotional service, one can become liberated from the cycle of difficulties that we face simply by taking up the practice of devotional service. So, in other words, liberation can occur right here, right now. In this 1 hour, we are all liberated from material anxieties. You can just, if you are mesmerized by the power of Bhagavatam and you just hear attentively, you'll find for this entire hour, whatever distractions and difficulties and anxieties we've had for the day, they're all put outside the door. They don't touch us actually. And Krishna also says very nicely, he says so importantly that that actually not only does he deliver and not only does he protect the pious devotees, but Krishna also checks the advances of the atheists or the demonic temperaments. So this is another function that the Lord comes. This is another reason for his appearance. So please keep these two in mind now, because now we are going to start today. The first part of our garland today will actually we will try to remember from the garland a particular pastime of Krishna. This is a famous pastime of Krishna that appears in the Bhagavatam 10th canto. And this is the pastime where Krishna chastises Kalia. You all know Kalia, right? There's a very famous painting, of Krishna dancing on the head of Kalia. So this is the wonderful pastime from Srimad Bhagavatam. One day, as Shukadev Goswami was sitting down for 7 days and hearing Bhagavatam, when Parikshit Maharaj was sitting down and listening to Shukadev Goswami ended a part of Krishna Leela by saying that all the cowherd boys one day came to the banks of the Yamuna river. And when they came to the banks of the Yamuna river, they were going to drink some water from it. But when they drank the water, they found that the water was tasting very funny. It was almost poisonous. And they were rendered unconscious actually. When the rest of the boys who were still conscious, they shouted for Krishna. And Krishna came, And when he saw that the boys were really unconscious, then Krishna, by his great potency, just by glancing at them, he revived all of them. But after reviving them, he was actually thinking that there is a reason why this lake must be actually poisoned. Is there something that is going on? So at that point of time, Parikshit Maharaj asks Shukadev Goswami. He says, Shukadev Goswami, why is it that this great lake of Yamuna river, which is so dear to Krishna and to the devotees, how did it become contaminated? And how is it that, that all these residents of Vrindavan were put in such a precarious situation? And so at that point of time, Shukadev Goswami starts the pastime of the Lord. Shukadev Goswami says to Parikshit Maharaj that within this river Yamuna, which is also known as Kalindi, in this river Yamuna, there was this snake. Within that lake, there was a portion of the lake where a great snake known as Kalia was actually living there. The snake lived there with a family. It had little baby snakes, and it also had many, many wives. These wives of Kalia were known as Nagapatnis. The interesting thing is, the Nagapatnis were great devotees of the Lord, but Kalia was anything but a devotee of the Lord. His great quality that Kalia displayed was actually envy. And the envy that he had was so powerful that it was poisoning the lake where the river Yamuna was. So Bhagavatam tells us, in this lake, because the serpent Kalia was there, it was a very powerful serpent. Bhagavatam tells us it had 1,000 hoods, of which 101 were prominent. It had reddish jewels, on the top of each of its hood, and it looked very powerful. No creature within that area of Yamuna was left in peace by Kalia. It had a fiery poison that it constantly emanated. It heated and boiled the waters of Yamuna river. In fact, the vapors were so poisonous, Bhagavatam said, that if a bird was flying across just the river Yamuna, the vapors of the poison would cause the bird to fall just dead in the waters. In fact, sometimes when Kalia would move very swiftly in the water, the sprays of the water, because of the force of its movement, would fall on the vegetation along the banks of the river, and all that vegetation would just die. The creatures, cows or calves drinking would be rendered unconscious. When Krishna heard from the cowherd boys and saw for himself how they were rendered unconscious, Krishna decided that it is enough. Kalia cannot pollute Yamuna river, because don't forget, in Bhagavatam, Yamuna river is a devotee of the Lord. And it was not just Krishna's duty to protect just the inhabitants of Vrindavan, but God, is so kind that he protects all the inhabitants. Animated inhabitants who are not human beings, like the rivers and the beautiful grass and the environment. Krishna was the protector of all of them. So what did he do? He decided he had to go into that poisonous lake and he had to fight Kalia. This is very interesting. Huh? So Bhagavatam is so specific about Krishna, and it tells us how Krishna climbed up the only tree along the banks of the river that was actually still alive. It is known as Kadamba Tree. It's a very famous Kadamba tree. It was a very high tree, and that tree is still there in Vrindavan, by the way. It is stated that all the other trees had died, but this tree, Kadamba, it was actually so powerful because it was given the potency by Krishna, because Krishna would use it for this service of jumping into the river of Kalia, to fight Kalia. So what happened? When Krishna climbed the high top of the Kadamba tree, he prepared himself to dive. Bhagavatam says, how did he prepare himself for battle? Remember, Krishna was a small boy, but he is Krishna. So he tightened his belt, just like you're getting ready for a wrestling fight. He slapped his arms, because he had bangles on them, the way wrestlers do. And after taking a deep breath, he jumped into the poisonous waters of Yamuna. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead landed into the water, Bhagavatam tells us, the snakes there that were living were agitated, all the baby snakes. And in fact, the displacement of water that Krishna caused in the river was so powerful that it just splashed onto the land. And it was a distance of 100 bow lengths. In those days, they measured distance by the length of a bow. And a bow normally would be 6 feet. So 100 bow lengths is very long. This is not amazing. Why? Because our acharyas tell us Krishna is known as Adbhutaha. He is also considered to be Vala. He is the most powerful. Even though he appeared to be a small boy, do not forget that he is the origin of all origins. So when Krishna dived into the river, what did he do? To attract the attention of Kalia, he began sporting in the lake. And he built up, so much of momentum and disturbance that Kalia came out. Like an elephant, Krishna was moving and moving in the lake and making sounds. And then when Kalia saw Krishna, he became astounded. It is very interesting. Kalia came to think, who is this person who dares, disturb my place? How dare this person comes? Do they not know that I am the greatest and the most powerful person? And so Kalia, through the murky waters filled with poison, wanted to see who he was. When Kalia saw Krishna, Bhagavatam tells us something very interesting. Sometimes when we have an envious mentality, when we see something good in a person, because of envy, our glasses are tainted. Our lenses, they are tainted actually by envy. If we are proud of ourselves and we think someone is greater than us, that pride actually transforms into envy. And that envy is then transformed into anger. Kalia exhibited all these three. He was very proud of his strength. And so when he saw Krishna, for a moment actually, because Kalia is also part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavatam says that when he saw the beauty of Krishna, for a while, he was also mesmerized by the beauty of Krishna. This is amazing, isn't it? Krishna is so beautiful that when Bhagavatam says that there's a beautiful verse, the verse, if you want, it is from the 10th canto, 16th chapter, the 9th verse. Tam prekshaniya sukumara ganavadatam Shri Vatsapita Vasanam Smita Sundarasyam Kridantam Aprati Bhayam Kamalodharangri Sandasya Marmaru Rusa Bhujaya Chachada. It's a beautiful description of the Lord. So Bhagavatam tells us, when Kalia saw Krishna, Krishna had yellow silken garments. He had a very delicate, attractive body. He was shining like the glowing white cloud. His chest wore the mark of Sri Vatsava. His face, even though he was in the water and he was going to fight, he was smiling. beautifully. How can Krishna fight with a demon and still smile? Because Krishna had no envy in the heart. Sometimes, when we have to be checked by the Lord, it is not that the Lord is envious of us. Sometimes when we are checked by senior and exalted devotees, it's not that they are envious of us. They don't keep anything in heart. That's why they can smile at us. So it's very important that when Kalia saw Krishna, he was mesmerized. Then immediately he became envious. So this is what happens sometimes. We actually see something great in someone, but after that, we become envious. So what did he do then? He became very upset and he began to try and attack Krishna. What did he do? He immediately twined himself around Krishna, coiled very tightly around Krishna, and then he started to suffocate Krishna. So furiously, he did that. And not only did he entwine and wrap him around him, but Kalia used, his sharp teeth that he had. He tried to bite Krishna on the chest and he bit him. He bit him. Now, this was happening as a great fight, and you can imagine the scene and the roaring of all that challenge between Kalia and Krishna. Bhagavatam tells us the boys who were on the lake, they were witness to this scene. They were shocked Krishna jumped into the lake. They were more shocked when Kalia caught Krishna. They became even more shocked when Kalia bit Krishna. In fact, Bhagavatam says, when the members of the community of cowherds, the little boys, they had accepted Krishna as their dearmost friend. For them, Krishna was life. He was their life. He was their soul. They became greatly disturbed. In their heart, they thought, that Krishna was going to be vanquished. These great devotees, they had one very important quality that Bhagavatam tells us. These residents of Vrindavan, they were not very greatly educated. They didn't go to college. They didn't have MSc, BSc, LLB, nothing. But they had one great quality. Tasmat ekena manasa. In their hearts, in their consciousness, there was only Krishna. Tasmat ekena manasa. Bhagavan Sadvatam Patihi. They only saw Krishna as the protector. They turned to no one else. And how did they do this? Shrotavya kirtitavyascha deyas pujaschcha nityada. It's a very important verse from Bhagavatam. No? I think it's 1-14 of Srimad Bhagavatam. So the residents of Vrindavan, this was how they felt for Krishna. That's why it's important for you and I to appreciate this one. Unlike struggling devotees, the residents of Vrindavan were completely fixed. With one pointed attention every day, they would constantly hear about Krishna. They would constantly glorify Krishna. They would constantly remember Krishna. And they constantly worshipped Krishna. And in that way, Krishna was the protector of the devotees. So they were very disturbed and they didn't know what to do. Then what happened? Around Vrindavan, the word began to spread. Word began to spread. Nanda Maharaj and the cowherd boys, they all rushed to the banks of the river Yamuna. And when they saw Krishna there, the men, they were thinking, we should jump in now. We should help Krishna. Because they were feeling that Krishna needs our help. But Balaramji, the elder brother of Krishna, and who is not different from Krishna, he stopped them. While the boys were panicking, the cowherd men with Yashoda, with Nanda Maharaj were panicking. The only one smiling at that time was Lord Balaram. Why was he smiling? Because Lord Balaram knew the true nature of Krishna. Everyone else thought Krishna is just a small little cowherd boy, but not Balaramji. He is the master of all transcendental knowledge. And Bhagavatam tells us that he was not in distress. Then Yashoda Mata heard about this. And you all know Yashoda Mata, she is completely beholden in love to the Lord. For her, Krishna was her life and her soul. There was nothing else in her life but Krishna. She was an elderly gopi, and like all the gopis, Krishna was tapta jivanam. Yashoda Mata and all the elderly gopis came. And when they saw this was what was happening, Yashoda Mata just swooned. And Bhagavatam tells us she just fainted. The young gopis also came. And when the young gopis came and they saw Krishna, what did they do? They did something very interesting. The young gopis came, and when they saw that Krishna seemed to be in trouble, they started remembering his loving friendship. What a nice point. Huh? Instead of thinking of anything else, tasmat ekena manasa. They all began encouraging each other. Let us remember the pastimes of Krishna. Let us remember the loving friendship. Let us remember his smiling glances. Let us remember his talks with us. And in that way, even though they were burning with great anxiety and sorrow, the important thing was they were completely absorbed in remembering Krishna. This is the mood of the residents of Vrindavan. So remember the verse, Paritranaya Sadhunam. Krishna came because of the great bhakti that these great devotees had for him. He was completely mesmerized by the bhakti as they were mesmerized by his love for them. That is why, Vrindavan Dham is so special to Krishna. In the prayers of the gopis, I think it is 10th canto, 31st chapter, the first prayer. It should be number 1, 1031 line. The gopis sing so nicely. And this is very important for us to understand the mood of the residents of Vrindavan. Jait Jayati te dikam janmana vrajaha Shrayata indira shashwat atrahi Daita drishyatam dikshutavakas Tvaidrita savas Tvan vichinvate Tavakatamritam Tapta jivanam Kavibiriditam Kalmasapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadattatam Bhuvi Granantiye Burida Janaha Atitiyad Bhavan Ahanikananam Trute Yugayate Tvam Apashyatam Kutila Kuntalam Shrimukham Chate Jada Udikshitam Pakshmakrit Drisham. So these were the prayers of the gopis, and they embody and they encapsulate the great devotion the gopis had. The gopis sang, Krishna, this land of Raja is very special, but it has become more special because you have walked in it. That is how they remembered Krishna. Indira, the goddess of fortune, has come because you are here, Krishna, not because of anything else. Sometimes we think, that everything, Krishna appeared in this world on Janmasthami at a very auspicious hour. But no, Shastras will tell us that when Krishna came, all the constellations lined up in auspiciousness because Krishna is supreme auspicious. So the gopis say, we are your devoted servants and we maintain our lives only to devote our lives to you. Then the gopis go on, to say, just remembering the nectar of your words and the descriptions of your activity, they are the life and soul of anyone who is suffering in this world. Not just the great devotees who are remembering Krishna, but all of us who are suffering in this world, we can all remember Krishna. And these narrations are translated and transmitted through Bhagavatam. And that's what we're doing today. And then the gopis pray in those verses that we just chanted, that when you go off in the mornings, to take care of the cows, you go away and you come back in the evening. But a tiny fraction of a second for us, when we don't see you, becomes like a millennium. And they curse Brahma, the creator. Why did he give us these eyelids? Because when we have eyelids, we have to blink. And when we blink, it seems a millennium because we can't see you. This was the great mood of the gopis. So please, that is why the gopis, they reacted very beautifully. So it's important at this point, while Krishna was battling Kalia, for us to understand and appreciate and contemplate on how the residents were approaching and reciprocating with Krishna. And while the elder gopis were very much anxious, the younger gopis were very much anxious, Nanda Maharaj and the cowherd men were very much anxious, Yashoda Mata was very much anxious, Krishna was still fighting. He was giving Kalia some chance. Let him think he's very strong. And Kalia tried to suffocate him. Kalia expended so much energy trying to bite Krishna. And so Krishna for some time remained within the coils of the serpent. And in doing so, he was imitating the behavior of an ordinary mortal. But when he understood, because he could see, that the whole banks of the Yamuna River, the women, the children, the residents, the cows, the calves, all the residents of Vrindavan and Gokul, they were in acute distress and anxiety because of their love for him, because he was their shelter and their life and their goal. he immediately decided, you know what, enough is enough. I think I have increased the affection of my devotees, and now I will do what I have to do. Sometimes at this point of time, people ask this question: why does Krishna sometimes put devotees into apparent difficulty? Why does Krishna sometimes test our faith so hard? That's a very important question. This question is nicely and affirmatively and emphatically answered in the 10th canto, 32nd chapter, 20th verse. And it's a beautiful verse. It's spoken by Krishna to the gopis. Naham tu sakyo bhajato pijantu bhajami amisham anuvritti vrittaye yatha dhana labdadhane vinashte tachintayanyan nibrito naveda. What does Krishna say? Krishna tells the gopis, and actually he's telling the whole world, the reason that I sometimes do not immediately reciprocate the affection of living beings, even though they are worshipping me so nicely, is because I want to intensify their loving devotion. They then become like a poor man who has gained some wealth for a while and then lost it. And then that poor man becomes so anxious that he cannot think of anything else but that wealth. So this is a very nice way of explaining. Sometimes in separation, our remembrance of our loved ones increases in this material world, isn't it? In the introduction, it was stated I travel so much, but now no one is traveling. But that doesn't mean we don't feel affection for those who are near and dear. So sometimes separation, even in material world, Srila Prabhupada says, can increase affection. How much more in the spiritual world? Another way of testing the faith of a devotee, which is so important, because when you test something, it grows stronger. That's why we have examinations. Without examination, an unexamined life is not worth living, if you remember this very important point. And sometimes when you want to put a nail, when you want to hang a nice picture and you want to put a garland, what would you do? You'll take a nail and you'll hammer it into the wall. Once you put it in the wall, any good person worth his salt who has done nailing like that, they will tell you what they will do before they hang the picture. They will test the nail. They will just test it, just to make sure it's strong. And when the nail is strong, the picture can be hung. So that is why sometimes we may not understand why the Lord may appear to put his great devotees in anxiety, but that anxiety increases their affection to them. And that is what Krishna did. But now Krishna thought, enough is enough. I've done enough. And now the residents of Vrindavan, I must protect them from this Kalia. So what did he do? The moment he decided he would not do that, he just began to expand. Krishna began to expand from a small boy. He just began to expand. And the moment he expanded, he pushed past the serpent's coils and he came out into the water. And Kalia licked his lips because he thought, now this will be the final battle. And he looked at Krishna with terrible envy. And he started, he started spewing terrible poisonous fires. But what did Krishna do? Krishna started playfully circling around Kalia, just like Garuda would play with a snake. In response, Kalia also moved around trying to catch Krishna. If you remember, in one very famous pastime, Mother Yashoda was chasing Krishna everywhere. Kalia was also chasing Krishna, but Kalia was not chasing Krishna on account of bhakti. He was chasing Krishna on account of envy. So he was looking for an opportunity to bite the Lord. But the more he circled, the more the Lord was elusive. And after a while, Kalia's strength became depleted by the relentless circling of Krishna. And so at this point of time, Krishna gained the advantage. With just one foot, he pushed down Kalia's raised shoulders. They were outside of the waters because the hood was outside, Krishna was outside. Now Krishna comes out of the water and he pushes with his feet the raised shoulders of Kalia. And he started mounting the broad serpentine heads of the snake. And so as he started stepping on the snake's heads, every time Kalia's hood went up, Krishna stepped it down. And as he started stepping on each of the hood, because there were 1,000 hoods, what did Krishna do? Krishna turned a scene that appeared to be tragic into a scene that was dramatic. Because Krishna is the master of arts and dances, Bhagavatam tells us. And so what did he do? he began to dance. And what was the dancing platform? The beautiful jewel heads of the great Kalia serpent. And Bhagavatam tells us his dance was so beautiful that as his lotus feet started touching each of the heads of Kalia, right, the feet of his touched the jewels, and so the reddish hue of the jewels touched the lotus feet of the Lord, and that enhanced the brilliance and the beauty of the Lord's lotus feet. Now, the moment the Lord started dancing, the residents of Vrindavan's anxiety dropped quite a bit because Krishna was dancing. And they began chanting Krishna's name. They just began chanting and remembering Krishna. But when Krishna started dancing, when you dance, what is always there? There's always kirtan. So all the denizens who were in the other Swarga Lokas and the celestial planets, the Gandharvas, the Charanas, the Vidyadharas, and even the Devatas, they all came out with their kettle drums and their musical instruments, and they started chanting beautiful praise. With great pleasure, they began accompanying the Lord's dance. They played drums. They made offerings of songs. They threw flowers, and they offered prayers. So see how Krishna transformed what appeared as an anxiety-driven situation by actually protecting the pious hearts of his devotees. Protection is not just protection from danger. Protection is empowerment of happiness and bliss in our heart. So protection is not a reactive thing for Krishna. Protection in Krishna consciousness is proactive. Krishna gives us bliss even as he protects us. Not that we are always on the defensive against this material world. This is a very important point. So Krishna started dancing on the hoods of the snake. And every time Kalia tried to push up again, Krishna pushed it down. And as he pushed it down, right, he would smash that stubborn, false ego of Kalia. And as Kalia started feeling this terrible push and pressure of Krishna's head, or Krishna's feet on his head, he started vomiting. What did he vomit? He started vomiting all the poison within. This is very important because the poisonous fumes of Kalia represented all his anarthas, all his sinful reactions, all his sinful habits, which were premised on pride, anger, and envy. And so in the first round, he started vomiting so much of these poisonous fumes. And as it all started coming out, occasionally, Kalia would try to dare raise his head. He would try. But even then, Krishna was so powerful that he would just push it down. Now we come to the very important juncture of this Bhagavatam pastime. Krishna, at that point, right, completely mesmerized the residents of Vrindavan, pacified them, but he also made Kalia exhausted. Now, after pushing out all the fumes, which were all his sins, Kalia now started vomiting blood. And as he started vomiting blood, he realized that his life was going to end actually. And at that point of time, Bhagavatam tells us, Kalia finally recognized that this little boy whom he took for granted is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the Supreme Master of all moving and non-moving beings. And so within his mind, very important, he had no strength left externally, but within his mind and within his heart, Kalia took shelter of the Lord. Very important. Within his mind and within his heart, Kalia took shelter of the Lord. At the point when Kalia took shelter of the Lord, his demeanor changed. Bhagavatam tells us he looked very repentant. His pride was smashed. Therefore, envy was gone. Anger was nondescript. What was being replaced? The moment pride, envy, and anger left Kalia, humility, remorse, repentance, admission of what he had done wrong. All of this started growing in the heart of Kalia. And this is such an important thing for us to learn. Nature abhors a vacuum. You've heard of that principle, isn't it? That once you have a vacuum, something enters it. But in Krishna consciousness, which is so dynamic, in bhakti, which is so dynamic, when we remove from our hearts all these unwanted habits and feelings, Krishna consciousness and devotional service is so proactive and dynamic that we can replace them instantly with good values and good spiritual qualities. And these were the spiritual qualities that started coming into Kalia's heart. Why did they come at that point? Because the turning point was Kalia, in his mind, took shelter of Krishna. This is such an important point for Janmashtami. Anyone who takes shelter of Krishna, Krishna will offer protection. It doesn't matter who the person is. The person could have been demon, the person could have been devotee. But for Krishna, the moment you try to take shelter of him, Krishna always forgives and Krishna always forgets. Living entities, we are too much. Very often we don't forgive and we don't forget. Sometimes people say, oh, I forgive, but I never forget. But in Shastras, if you forgive but don't forget, actually you have not forgiven. And frankly speaking, the highest truth in this forgiveness and forgetfulness principle is that after we have forgiven someone, we should have forgotten about the whole matter. We should forget that even there was such a matter. So Kalia was actually transformed by the touch of Krishna. Just by the trampling and the dancing. Let's not use the word trampling. Krishna, he's a dancer. Let's use the word dancing. As he danced, he touched that Brahma Sparshanam that touched Kalia, actually transformed his heart. And Kalia also voluntarily decided to take shelter of Krishna. Now, at this point of time, the wives of Kalia, Nagapatnis, they were all watching in anxiety because their husband was going to die. Their children were so scared for their father. But the Nagapatnis were great devotees of the Lord. So they came. They came before Krishna. They placed their children in front of the Lord. They bowed before Krishna. They lay their bodies flat, they offered dandavats to Krishna. And they desired the liberation of their sinful husband. And they wanted to take shelter of Krishna. And they now started praying to Krishna. So these prayers of the Nagapatnis, they're very important prayers. We don't have time, today. But when you have time, you should really study these prayers. Because in these prayers, they say so many beautiful points. The Nagapatnis, first of all, started by saying, very nice point. They said, the punishment that this offender, our husband, has been subjected to is certainly very fair. They say it. They say, my dear Lord, you have incarnated, within this world to protect the devotees and curb the envious and cruel persons. Yet, you are so equal in your disposition that you look equally upon your enemies as you do your own sons. Because when you impose what appears to be a punishment for what appears to be an enemy, the truth is, it is for their ultimate benefit. Ultimate benefit. I know so many of you must be parents there. How many times the difficult child in your house has received your most attention? Sometimes even the child who doesn't give trouble, they seem to think, how come I don't get so much attention and the troublemaker is getting so much attention? So the Nagapatnis are saying, that is your mercy, Krishna. That is your mercy. What you have actually done to our husband is not bad. It is actually your mercy. Because this punishment you have given to one who is faithless actually has driven away all his contamination. Even though our husband has been so envious and he has been so angry and so harmful to others, yet you have given him the greatest fortune. Now listen to what the Nagapatnis say. The Nagapatnis say, my dear Lord, can we ask you something? Did our husband perform some austerities in previous life, so much so that now he has the ability to become the foundation for your dance? Is that why you're so pleased with him that you danced on him? Maybe in some previous life, he executed some great religious duties with compassion for living beings. Is that why you're so satisfied with him that you danced on him? Then they went on to say, my dear Lord, Lakshmi Devi, the goddess of fortune, she performed austerities for centuries to just have a touch of your lotus feet. But our husbands, to our remembrance, didn't perform one single austerity. And yet, you have given him so much mercy that he has attained the dust of your lotus feet, for which the whole world is hankering for. Brahma is hankering for it. The rulership of all three worlds are hankering for it. The perfection of yoga hankers for it. The perfection of liberation hankers for it. And still, you have given it to my husband, to our husband. And then they say, our husband has taken birth in the mode of ignorance and is controlled by anger. But you have given him the opportunity to achieve that which is almost impossible to achieve. And now they wind down their prayers. And they say, my Lord, A master should tolerate the offense committed by his child, isn't it? See, they are praying very hard, because Kalia really was looking like he was going to die. Her blood was coming out, his life air was leaving. He had taken shelter of the Lord, but he was in a precarious situation. So the Nagapatni say, my dear Lord, if a child were to commit offense to his parents, does the parents continue to be unhappy with the child? We tolerate the offense, right? So in the same way, you please forgive our foolish husband. He did not understand who you are. Please forgive him. My Lord, be merciful. It is always proper for the saintly to feel compassion for women like us. The serpent is about to give up his life. Give us back our husband. For many years, the Nagapatnis always preached to Kalia, They preached to Kalia and they told him about how important it is to be a devotee of the Lord because they were devotees. But Kalia always thought, no, 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 my wives don't know. Only I know. And this is the problem sometimes, with men. Bhagavatam says women by nature are so pious and they have such implicit faith in Krishna. But men sometimes, they think that they have so much of understanding of what happens. Kalia was in that situation, very practical point. And he was thinking that, my wives are just, continuing remembering Krishna for what? But today he saw the value of it. He saw the value of it. So now the wives, they stop their prayers. They say, we are your maid servants. We are your servants. You do what you have to do, my Lord. Anyone who execute your orders will be automatically freed from all fear. When the Nagapatnis praised Krishna that way, the Supreme Personality of Godhead smiled. He felt so happy that his devotees, were praying for Kalia. This is what pleases Krishna most, when we pray for the welfare of others. The reason why Kalia survived this was really because of the association that he got from two persons. The association of the Lord by dancing on him, and the prayers of his wives for years and years and years, and now at this critical point. That's why a very important takeaway of today's pastime is the power of association. Even if we discount the association of the Lord, we cannot discount the association of the devotees. The Lord's heart melted when he heard the Nagapatnis putting out such feeling prayers. And therefore he then said, get up, Kalia. The personality of Godhead released the serpent Kalia. And because he had fallen unconscious, it appeared like Kalia was in a very precarious situation. But because he was released by Krishna and now blessed by Krishna, Kalia regained his vital force. He regained his sensory functions. Then breathing loudly and painfully, what did he do? He actually started offering prayers to Krishna. Can you imagine? Where Kalia started and where he ended. Why? Because of the power of association. He saw his wives offering prayers. He got touched by Krishna. So now he followed. He also offered prayers. There's so many beautiful prayers there, but one prayer is very nice. In that prayer, in text 56 of that chapter, very nicely it is stated. Text 56 of 10th canto, 16th chapter. There, Kalia says this, our very birth as a snake has made us envious, ignorant and constantly angry. It's so difficult, my Lord, for such persons to give up our conditional nature. But Krishna, you are so kind that you are the actual cause of freedom from illusion. And then just before Kalia finishes, Kalia says something very nice. Kalia turns to Krishna and he says, Krishna, you are the omniscient Lord of the universe. You are the actual cause of freedom from illusion. Please arrange for us whatever you consider proper. See, when Kalia surrendered to Krishna, it was not conditional surrender. Okay, I surrender to you now. These are the terms of my surrender. I want out. I want to be free. I want some perks. No. Kalia said, you arrange for us whatever you consider proper, whether it is mercy or whether it is punishment. Why? Because for you, my Lord, it is the same. And for all of us, it is the same. Amazing point. After Krishna heard Kalia's words, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he replied, O great Kalia, you may not remain here any longer. Even though Krishna delivered Kalia from this, his first lookout was always the protection of the pious. And so he was very firm about this. He said, Kalia, you must leave Vrindavan and go to the ocean. And if you go to the ocean, there you will find a space which is actually in a nice spot, and I will ensure that Garuda will never disturb you. Because Garuda was the natural enemy, so to speak, of Kalia. So Krishna then gave Kalia the assurance that he should leave and go with his wife and children, and no harm will come to them. Kalia joined his wives in worshipping the Lord with great joy and reverence. Great joy and reverence. So Kalia worshipped Krishna, the Lord of the universe. At that point, before he left, Kalia had a lot of jewelry, garments, all these things, very opulent, very rich snake. But he took all of this and he offered a beautiful puja on the banks of Yamuna to Krishna. And after that, what did he do? He immediately left. The moment he left, the Yamuna river was purified by Krishna. She was immediately restored to her original condition. All the little boys, they became free of poison, and the waters of Yamuna became nectarian. All this happened because of the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What can we understand now? The pastime has ended, and we can now take some very important points in conclusion of this beautiful pastime. Let us go back to our garland of Paripranayam Sadhanam. The point there is Krishna comes to re-establish the principles of religion. He also does that by protecting the pious, and he annihilates and he checks the miscreants. One thing that we must understand about Krishna is this very important quality of his. In Bhagavatam, it is known as Krishnena Adbhutaha Karmana. Karmana means actions. Krishnena Adbhutaha Karmana. What it means is Krishna has wonderful activities, and his activities are always inconceivable and transcendental. But always remember, his first lookout is always to save the residents of Vrindavan and the devotees. He came to save them, and after protecting them, he also saved and protected Kalia. This is very important. Even by banishing Kalia from the lake of Yamuna, he assured that Kalia would be protected and he would not incur the wrath of Garuda. This is a very important point. In just one stroke of a pastime, he protected the residents. He increased the hankerings of the residents in remembering him. He enhanced their bhakti. Then he touched, right? By his beautiful touch, what did he do? He actually purified the contaminated envy and anger of this great snake. He changed the heart of the snake. And that is very important. In the verse, in the shloka of 496 of Srimad Bhagavatam, this point is given. Yonta pravishya mama vacham imam prasuptam sanjeevayati akila sattidara swadhamna anyams chahasta sharana shravana tvagadim prana namo bhagavate purushaya tubhyam. You all remember Dhruva Maharaj, right? Dhruva Maharaj was a little boy, but he was determined to see Krishna. After prayers and great austerities, Krishna appeared before him, but he was dumbfounded and he couldn't say anything to praise the Lord. What did the Lord do? The Lord took a conch shell and he just touched Dhruva with his conch shell. And the moment he touched Dhruva with the conch shell, what did Dhruva say? My Lord, you are all powerful. Because of the touch of you, you have now entered within me. You have enlivened all my sleeping senses. My hands, my legs, my ears, my touch sensation, even my very prana, my life force. Up till now, without your touch, I was walking around, my Lord, but actually I was as good as dead. This is what happened to Kalia. This is what happened to Kalia. Kalia was dead to the world of devotional service. But just by coming in contact with Krishna, so powerful is Krishna, and then coming in contact with sadhu sangha of the devotees of Krishna, what happened? His heart melted, his heart changed. So this is a very important point that we must remember. The value of association, the protection of the Lord, and most importantly, there is always hope. There is always hope and redemption for all of us. We all will have a little bit of Kalia in us. All of us have some pride. All of us struggle with envy because we're in this material world. But if we come in contact with the devotees, if we somehow or another have the nice association of the Lord, then this is the true significance of Janmasthami. Krishna appearing in our hearts through the association of devotees and through the touch of the Lord. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, the chastisement of Kalia ki, and the protection of the residents of Vrindavan ki. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Your Grace. That was such a wonderful discourse on chastisement of Kalia. We really did enjoy it. As a child, I remember hearing this pastime from my grandmother. But after hearing from you today, I realized how much more depth that you showed us is there in this pastime. And there is so much to learn from this pastime. So for that, our humble thanks to you. I would now like to take the session forward by asking if anybody has any questions for Your Grace. So the floor is now open. The chat box is open. If anybody would like to ask a question, do raise a hand and we will unmute you and you can ask the question in person. Alternatively, do write it out in the chat box and we can take it from there.
Mataji, I think there's a question from Shobha Mataji that was put earlier. Can I read it? It's on the chat actually.
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah. You mentioned that the principles of religion are established by Krishna and not by man. How do we know this? How do we know it's not hearsay? Very good question. Bhagavatam answers this very nicely. In the 6th canto, 16th chapter of Bhagavatam, I think it's 41 and 42nd verse. If you read that 2 verses, you'll find that the principles, the most important principle of religion that is enacted by God himself is the absence of envy in the execution of religion. A religion that is concocted to satisfy greed, to satisfy desires, to bring anxiety and pain instead of bringing peace and lack of envy, that is actually very often considered in Bhagavatam as what we call cheating religion. Cheating because it provides us with the idea that it could be religious. But when you take it up, instead of inculcating values that bring peace and bliss into our lives and others' lives, it actually brings disturbance. It actually creates envy. It creates pride. So we should be very careful not to have what we call inventive religions, speculative religions. So the real test, Shobha Mataji, is in the test of how we practice it. And it's in the test of how we actually feel in our hearts when we are practicing it. It cannot be, when you practice something, you'll find that actually you will know whether it is working or not. So when you have time, please look at 6:16:41 and 6:16:42. And I'll be very happy to help you or discuss the verse at some point, or even Vishnu Chaitanya Prabhu would be there. So that would be nice. I hope that is helpful. Let me see.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yes, there's another question, Prabhu, from
there is, okay. Let me see. Did Kalia attain moksha? Very nice point. Well, generally speaking, when there are certain pastimes where Krishna vanquishes the demon and the demon leaves the material body, and then it either merges into Krishna in one of the different forms of liberation, moksha. But Kalia is one of those interesting demonic personalities who didn't die. Therefore, in one sense, he did not achieve one of those liberations which is required when you actually leave your body. But Kalia achieved something more precious. He actually achieved purification of consciousness, which actually is even higher than the concept of moksha. In the field and school of bhakti, a devotee is content to be anywhere in this world, as long as the devotee can, with one pointed attention, remember Krishna. So Kalia achieved that state because of the Nagapatnis. He achieved the state because of the mercy of the Lord. I guess the important point that your question is coming to, and I like the question, is that sometimes we wait until we are going to die or we have died to achieve what we think is the goal of devotional service. But Bhagavatam tells us we can achieve the goal of devotional service right here, right now, in this life. A change of consciousness is liberation from all the material conditions around us. I hope that helps, Murli Prabhu. Very nice question. Okay.
One more question, Prabhu, in the chat box.
Yeah. Is it from Raghuveer, Krishna Prabhu? Prabhuji, how can we remove the Kalia in us which is not going away despite all the association? Well, I know Raghuveer Prabhu. I don't think he's envious at all. So never mind. He's asking for all of us. So that's fine. Now, it's very important for us to remember that when we start taking up devotional service, it's not so easy that all the conditioned ideas of envy, pride, lust, greed, they don't go overnight. But we should not despair. We should have faith that even while these difficulties are there, we are still given so many opportunities to improve. So it's either a question of whether you want to dwell on the fact that, oh, I still have difficulties, or you're determined and you have faith that these difficulties will go. More and more association will be good. More contemplation and practice and quality of devotional service. With these tools that are given to us by the Acharyas, definitely without doubt, by Krishna's mercy, we can definitely remove the Kalia in us. Actually, you don't have to remove Kalia in you. You just have to transform. If you become associated with the Kalia who was associated with Nagapatnis and Krishna, that is good enough. That is good enough. So I hope that's useful, Prabhu.
Prabhu, one last question.
Sure.
It says, do demons who achieve moksha by death in the hands of Krishna not attain a purified consciousness?
Okay, do demons who achieve moksha by death in the hands of Krishna not attain? They do attain purified consciousness, but they may not attain the highest ability that devotees can attain, that of actually serving Krishna personally in Golok Vrindavan or in the Vaikuntha Loka. Sometimes what they do is they merge into the impersonal form of the Lord, and then there they become purified, and later on they're given more opportunities to become even more purified. So always remember, purity is a spectrum. Purity and consciousness is a spectrum. It's not static, Prabhupada says. It's always dynamic. I hope that's useful.
Thank you, Prabhu. Prabhu, do we have time for one last question?
Actually, yeah, there's one by Renuka, Mataji. Should I take that, Mataji?
Yes, please, Prabhu. Okay.
How do we forget the wrongdoings of others towards us? I always thought we can forgive, but today I realized that by still remembering, we haven't truly forgiven. A lot are etched in the memories. I'm so glad you came to this realization, and it's so important. I think you speak for all of us, because we're all in the situation where we think that we have forgiven, but because we have not forgotten, actually the heart, is not completely light. And when the heart is not completely free of it, there's no space for Krishna. There's no space for Krishna. The best way to forget the wrongdoings of others, Bhagavatam tells us, is to understand that other devotees are also harassed by the modes of material nature. Other living entities are also harassed by the modes of material nature. Very often, Bhagavatam tells us that while someone may want to hurt somebody, if we understand where they're coming from, if we try to understand that they may not be in the right mode of spiritual maturity to understand the consequences of their action, that compassion actually helps us to get past them, to forgive and to forget. So instead of becoming angry with their nature, because their nature is there, some like Kalia had an envious nature. If Krishna gave up with Kalia's nature, Kalia would never have been given a chance. But Krishna forgave his nature, and then he promptly forgot about his nature. And because he did that, Kalia reformed. Did the Nagapatnis ever give up on their husbands? No. So many wrongdoings he did. They forgave him, and they forgot that. But they concentrated always to pray for the husband. So one very proactive way of forgetting the wrongdoings of others is we please pray for them. And if we can't pray for them very nicely, we pray to Krishna that our consciousness changes instead of always thinking of their faults. I hope that is helpful.